amazing work that we need to be able to sort of highlight.
Thank you.
So today's topic is titled, What is SGL? And I know some of your work focuses on that population. And I really want the audience to learn a little bit more about sort of what that is and sort of what it means to communities of color, specifically African-American community.
Mm-hmm.
So how would you define that?
Yeah, so I think in one of my very first papers I published, I talked about SGL and defined it. And so SGL for me is both personal and professional in a sense, because I identify as SGL personally, and SGL basically stands for same gender loving, and it is a term coined by Cleo Monago, who's actually in LA, and he has this called Amasi, I believe. But he does all of these very culturally specific programming for African American communities and Black same-gender loving male communities in particular. And I first heard the term before I even started graduate school. I moved to New York City in 2007 to do AmeriCorps in between undergrad, graduate school.
Okay.
And there's this group called Black Men's Exchange, and it was this social group of Black same-gender loving men getting together. And so they would go around, and so all of these men were identifying themselves as SGL. And at that time, I only knew about gay, right? Gay, bisexual, and so on and so forth. So I was just like, what's this SGL thing? And they're like, oh, it's this more culturally affirming, culturally specific term to talk about the unique experiences of what it's like to not only be a person that's same-sex attracted, has same gender, sexual and romantic relationships, but also this intersection of race and class and things like that. And so I just thought, mind blown, and I was just like, oh, this is so great. So for me, that really gets at the specific experience of the population that I'm most interested in.
And sort of why is same gender loving more affirming as opposed to just sort of identifying as gay or bisexual?
Right, definitely. And I will say that through my research, I pretty much only look at Black sexual minorities, right? And so as sexual minority men in particular, a lot of the times. And so in some of the research I've done, I've asked these Black men how they identify. And I would say that only about 20% actually identify as same gender loving. And so what that says to me is that, one, we're all heterogeneous, so we're not going to all identify the same. But it also says to me, though, about how pervasive the white norm is. And what I mean by that is that gay and lesbian and even queer to a certain extent, especially in previous generations, I think now more people of color are reclaiming the word queer. But definitely in previous generations, those words were very much identified with a white gay liberation movement. White people, cisgender gay and lesbian people were in the forefront of that movement as far as the image. Now, the actual work we know included trans and people in color, so on and so forth, but the actual image that was sold to Americans in order to make these sort of legislative leeways into more equality was this white, pristine, middle class image. Even when we look at something like HIV work, the image was a white gay man, right? And so I think a lot of people in the Black communities, Black male communities have noticed that and noticed that when we're talking about gay and lesbian, often our unique experiences are left out of that equation. So this more culturally affirming term comes into play to encompass all of that, to see us more beyond just same-sex attraction or romantic feelings, but as whole human beings.
I'm wondering, what is when you talk about culturally affirming and some of the connotations that come along with identifying as being a gay man, what is the connection between sort of addressing thoughts around sort of masculinity along with the concept of SGL?
Yeah, I think it's, I'm a member of ABSI. I'm a proud member of ABSI. It's really the only psychological institution, organization that I'm a member of anymore. And so I consider myself a Black psychologist in the way in which they use that term, like me,
Okay.
it's grounded in Black psychology. Although I bring in an intersectional lens stuff, a little bit more intentionally. And so when I think about culturally affirming and what it means to be SGL, I really see that as aligned within the Black psychological tradition, especially when we look at Black psychology as the illumination of the human spirit,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is defined as, so the human spirit does not have a gender, right? And so the human spirit does not have a particular set of genitals or anatomical structures that goes along with it, right? The human spirit is fluid and so on and so forth. And so there's the work by Cheryl McAllister that, if you have time, I encourage you to pick up. But she looks at those, she's in sociology, but she takes this sociological Afrocentric perspective looking into and really makes the case for the LGBTQI community, same gender loving community, and placing it within the tradition of Black psychology, and saying that on the spiritual level, we can actually see that the same gender loving identities are more congruent than separate from what it means to be Black and what it means to be a human being in an Afrocentric sense. We have theorists that say that, you don't just get to be human, but to be a human, you have to, it's the way you treat others and your legacy, so on and so forth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so all that to say that when we start to think about male role socialization, I think even within the Association of Black Psychologists, even within the discipline of Black psychology, I think a lot of times when we start to talk about gender, it's very much white centric.
Mm-hmm.
And so in this sense that there still is a focus on this bigenderism, meaning there's only one or the other, there's these dichotomous categories instead of this fluidity. But if you are really thinking about the nature of spirit in an Afrocentric sense, that is fluid. It's not one thing or another.
Mm-hmm.
It is all things, right? And so if we're looking at gender and sexual orientation, there should be that fluidity. Some people may stay over here, some people may stay over there, but it allows for more than just one thing, more than one thing. And in some ways, parents are responding to anti-Black discrimination when raising their boys.
Mm-hmm.
I know in particular for me, my father was always like, you got to toughen up, you got to be a man, so on and so forth, from a very early age before I even really knew what those terms were. Right. And so it wasn't until I got into college and my father and I were talking, because I really didn't like him much until probably about my sophomore year of college. And so he would come pick me up from college, because I only went to college about an hour and a half away from home. And so when I want to go home, I didn't have a car. So he would come pick me up, and we got to talking one day, and he says, Slim, he calls me Slim. And he says, Slim, I know I was hard on you, but, I was just so afraid that the world was going to take advantage of you because you were so emotional and, you cried a lot. And, I just really wanted you to be tough because the world isn't a kind place to Black men.
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of opened me up in that regard. I was just like, oh, so you actually love me? And so you were doing this because you love me, not because you hated me, which is what I thought for the past 19 years. And so I think when it comes to this male role socialization, I think Black parents are often responding to anti-Blackness, but they are also responding from a limited knowledge field, right? And that's not to mess over them or anything like that, but it's part of being human.
Right. I mean, I think one of the things that you touched on was this idea about trying to raise a Black boy specifically that can fend for himself and also protect himself when it comes to society, and knowing that, regardless if you identify as Black man, as a Black SGL man, as a Black gay man, that society sees you as Black, and that you're going to face some of the similar challenges. And I don't know if parents oftentimes think about those things, particularly when they have a son that they may sort of perceive that he may at some point identify that way, or that the child has knowingly acknowledge to them, particularly for teenagers that may have come out to their parents, that they make an active decision to say, like, I want to protect you from the world. I think that as parents, it's a tough job, and I specialize in working with kids, and so one of the things that I often tell parents is that, unfortunately, being a parent doesn't come with a manual, and so I think parents face a lot of tough decisions, and when they are concerned about their son that may be different and outside of sort of these heteronormative gender roles that we think about, that they get concerned and they get afraid. And